She Persists Book Club Author Series. I'm Krista Hines. I'm a freelance writer, journalist, and a creative writer working on my first historical fiction novel. I created She Persists Book Club for readers who are passionate about women-centric historical fiction, transformative storytelling, and powerful female voices. Today, I'm thrilled to be with Marian Palaia, the award-winning author of the critically acclaimed novel, The Given World. It was published by Simon & Schuster in 2015. It was shortlisted for the Saroyan International Prize for Fiction, longlisted for the Bingham First Novel Prize, finalist for the VCU Cabell Award, and recognized by Kirkus as a Best Novel, Best Historical Novel, and Best Debut of 2015. Marian received her MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and was a John Steinbeck Fellow at San Jose State University. She currently lives in San Francisco, California, and in Florence, Arizona, with her Tasmanian tiger dog, Action Joe Jackson, and the ghost of her Mongolian barking shepherd, Tupelo. She is at work on her second novel, A 20% Chance of Mercy, and a memoir and letters called Tripping. Marian's debut novel, The Given World, begins on a quiet family farm in Montana in the 60s and follows the unconventional and unforgettable heroine, Riley. When Riley's beloved big brother is declared MIA in Vietnam, young Riley packs up her shattered heart and leaves her family, her first love, and a few small things behind. Her travels take her to the grit and haze of San Francisco in the 70s, to a gypsy-populated post-war Saigon. By trial and error, she builds a new life, working on cars, delivering newspapers, tending bar. She befriends, rescues, and is rescued by a similarly vagabond cast of characters whose unraveled souls sting hardest and linger the longest. Foolhardy, funny, and wise, Riley's challenge as she grows into a woman is simple: survive long enough to go home again, or at least figure out where home is and who might be among the living there. Welcome, Marian.
Hi, thanks, Krista. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, including your background, and how you found your way into the writing life.
My background, I've lived all over the place. It's funny, people ask me where I'm from and I don't really know what to say. I was born in Riverside, and then my family moved around a lot after that, and it wasn't a military thing. It was just that we were vagabond.
Riverside, California?
Well, California, we went from Riverside to Sacramento to Washington, D.C., and then I set off from there and went to Colorado, Washington State, Montana, and eventually ended up in San Francisco and then back in Montana. So and also Saigon and Nepal and Hong Kong.
You've traveled more than a lot of military.
Yeah, there were years where I wasn't allowed to, if I had to go pick somebody up at the airport, I wasn't allowed to take my passport because there was a high likelihood that I would just get on an airplane. So
you have an adventurous spirit.
Yeah. The dog slowed. When I got a dog, it kind of slowed me down because I didn't want to go anywhere without him. But so now I drive everywhere. But yeah.
Yeah. So tell us how your travels and how you kind of came into the writing life. Were you always a writer since a child, or how does
Pretty
tell us a
much.
little bit about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always loved just playing with words. And in high school, in elementary school, I would write things and the teachers would say, you can't do this. Like, this is not proper, whatever, grammar or English. And I just love to play with the language. And in high school, I wrote poetry, and it was really very, very bad poetry. And in college, when I was living in Montana, and I was married for a very short time there, but I went to school at the University of Montana, and I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't know what that meant. So I started studying. I took a beginning journalism class, and I made up all my stories. I was living 50 miles outside of town on a ranch, and we were supposed to cover town council meetings and stuff like that, and I couldn't because there weren't any where I was. So I just made stuff. I just made stuff up, like the Drummond Loggers Wives Association meeting, and anyway, that my professor knew, like he busted me, and I would just lie and say no, that really happened, and he would be like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. And at the end of the semester, I went to his office and I said, you were right. Like I did make up all that stuff, and I'm really sorry.
You came clean.
I did. And he said, he said, don't worry. He said, it's okay. He said, you're a writer, like you can write. He said, but you're in the wrong department.
Creative writing.
He said, as a journalist, you're not allowed to just make things up. So he actually walked me over to the liberal arts building and introduced me to Dick Hugo, the poet, who was the head of the creative writing department there at the time. And pretty much said, I've got a live one for you. And I was just, my mind was blown. I was like, what? Creative writing, what? There's a department, like you can study this? This is a discipline? What? And that was it, and I was probably 24 when that happened. And I was just,
Wow.
and then it was all, then all hell broke loose.
Yeah, when you get paid to write creatively and make stuff up, it's really awesome.
Well, I didn't get paid for it for many, many years. Like that was about a 30-year journey before there was any money.
It takes time and a lot of practice, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, tell us, I know you're very well traveled. You've talked about all of the different places you've been. How do you think traveling has influenced your writing life and your creativity?
Big time. Just my writing life and my creativity, and also just my knowledge of the world, like just being able to just to see what it's like not being in this bubble, and to me, America's like pretty much one big bubble. Like we all have our little individual bubbles inside America, but it is, this sort of the concept that a lot of people here have, that like everybody wants to come to the United States because it's the best place in the world, and and going out and seeing the world and realizing that that is just not true. Both things are not true. A, not everybody wants to come here, and B, it's not the best place in the world. It's just the best place for some people who live here. And Vietnam really, I lived in Vietnam for a year. I lived in Saigon for a year in 1994. And that really, I mean, I was incredibly stupid. Not stupid, but considering growing up in the family I did with, two teachers, and my dad was a history teacher and really brilliant. And I'm kind of astonished when I look back and think, I was in my 30s before I really started waking up to like the world as a larger place than just my little part in it, probably because I did a lot of drugs when I was younger. And that sort of limits your, that limits your universe. And so, once I got out of that and started traveling and seeing things, it just, it just opened my mind. And living in Saigon was, I don't know, just viscerally, just being there, I couldn't help but write about it. And that's how the book opens, is that, is in Saigon. And it was just it's still so vivid to me all these years later.
When were you there?
1994.
Okay. So you started traveling after college when you were in your early 30s?
Yeah, pretty much. My first big adventure was, I went to Hong Kong in 92. A friend of mine lived there, and he convinced me to come and teach English for the summer. And I just fell in love with Asia. And people were just starting to go to Vietnam then for tourists, mostly Brits and Australians. And there was still an embargo that the United States had, and Clinton lifted that in early 1994. But when I got there were hardly any Americans there, which I kind of liked. And because we can be kind of obnoxious out in the world. And it's funny because the other expats wouldn't, if another American like came to our bar, they wouldn't bust me as being American, because they knew that I didn't necessarily want to hang out with the other Americans. And then the polite people would say, "Oh, what part of Canada are you from?" Because they didn't want to insult you by assuming
Wow.
you're American. Yeah, it's funny to get out into the world and see how we're perceived, not necessarily as individuals, but just, our government has been known to do some kind of wacky things, especially in Vietnam. So anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what was so interesting for me to read this story. I haven't read a lot of historical fiction really that takes place during the Vietnam War. I remember as a kid, in my history classes, and the Vietnam War would always be at the end of the history book. And we
Yeah.
never seemed to get to it. And it used to be so disappointing because I wanted to know more and try to understand that conflict better.
It would be interesting to see a current history book and what current history books actually have to say, like current, history books that they teach in high school have to say about the Vietnam War, because it's so complex, and there's so many different ways of looking at it. I have an entire library of books just about Vietnam. And it's just the one thing that, it was just so complicated, and we went about it. It was just the way we went about it was just so arrogant and so dumb, really. We really underestimated everybody involved. And but the heartbreaking thing that with all this reading that I've learned is that there were so many times that we almost didn't do it. There were so many times when Kennedy almost said, "No, this is a bad idea. Let's not do this." And Johnson too, there were so many times. And it's heartbreaking when you think of how many, just how many lives were ruined on, there and here, and families and generations afterwards. There are still Vietnam vets living on the street in San Francisco. That's a lot of the homeless people in the country are, Vietnam vets. And it's just, I don't know, it's just tragic. So I guess, that's in a large part where the book came from, was just that concept that it's not just one thing or one party that gets damaged. It just spreads.
Yeah. I think that was it's so fascinating how you explore this story, not so much from a soldier's perspective, but from the family who's left behind, particularly Riley's experience, who's the sister, and, really struggles with I think it's one thing almost to know that your loved one has died, but to not know but to have a situation where they're missing in action, or you have no idea what happened, and there's just no closure.
Right.
So I felt that I could see it really resonated with me what she was going through, the way you describe it in the story. I'd love for you to read a little bit of the book, if you wouldn't mind. I think it was like page 202, where she is talking. There's a really powerful section. You want to read the passage there?
Yeah, let me I read a couple of paragraphs. And this is when she first gets home, and she finds a home to San Francisco, and she finds a place to live in the city with a couple of gay guys. And they have a cat anyway. So she's talking about animals. And she says, I like the idea of an animal, of getting to know something gradually, little by little, with no obligation to converse. I've come home tongue-tied as why from Saigon after the equivalent in time of a tour of duty there and then some. I'm shell-shocked, though not in the usual sense. It is no longer Vietnam, but America now that shocks, with its shiny veneer, its heaps of shrink-wrapped paraphernalia, besides which the war has been over for a long time. At least that war has. And there have been others, but there have been others since, ongoing and everywhere. And maybe they are partially to blame for the fact that something feeling quite like armed conflict still carries on in my head, armed but deceptively quiet, as if all the combatants are required to use silencers and the stealth missiles to remain stealthy, clear to impact. I didn't want to come back. I had grown to love being one of the missing, living in a place where no one could find me. No one could just stop by or call me up. I was so far away from my memories, I could almost pretend they were someone else's. I had learned that distance was a force field, so very useful, and my mind was so busy trying to get me through the city and the days, I could forget for long stretches of time I'd ever had another life. But it had not gone anywhere, or maybe temporarily into witness protection. It took several weeks and a serious effort just to go buy a plane ticket, and it killed me that it had been so easy to leave Vietnam in one piece. I did not think it should have been that easy. I'm so glad you reminded me of that.
That, yeah,
Of that passage, because I had forgotten. When I went and looked at it, I was like, wow. I wrote
Yes, you did.
I don't look at this book very much anymore because I've been working on, for so long on the new one. But I was like, sometimes I look at it and I was like, that's pretty good.
Isn't it amazing when you write something and you come back later and you're like, wow, where did that come from? It's almost like channeled writing.
It is, and I love that. It's like
Mhm.
somebody sneaks in the middle of the night and and edits your work for you. It's like,
Mhm.
yay.
It's really cool when that happens. So, how do you think the war in Vietnam really shaped the generation who came of age during that time?
I think it had everything to do with how, I mean, I can't speak for, everybody in my generation, obviously, but my friends, um, and not all of them. It's funny. I've kind of had two very distinct sets of friends in high school. And one set was, more or less like me. We were just kind of, shot out of a cannon. Like we were just so wild and so crazy. And that's, and a lot of those people didn't make it. And so that, that trajectory of just kind of just having that horrible news in your face every night, and watching brothers and friends and people go off. Like we were right on the cusp. My graduating class, we were right on the cusp. Like some of my friends actually had their numbers picked in the lottery, and then it all stopped. Like, but they were all ready to go, and it was just kind of that on top of, there was still the nuclear threat. We'd all grown up having to hide under our desks, thinking, or being told to jump into the nearest ditch if the Russians fly overhead and they're dropping a bomb. It's like, go climb into a culvert. I was like, yeah, that's gonna help. And then Vietnam, and it was just, and then the whole business of, the guys coming back and being yelled at the airport, and, and told that they were, that they were bad people. And I don't know, it was such a mess. And, and it wasn't just Vietnam, but that was at the center of it, the protests and don't trust anybody over 30 and all that. And I think it was, it was a huge influence on, where a lot of us ended up later on. So,
And I think about all of the chaos of the last few years, and it feels almost like I don't know if there's even any comparison to what because I didn't really come of age during the Vietnam War. So can you compare the two, or is there no comparison really because they're
Well,
just very different?
I think there's definitely a comparison, but I think the main difference is that there was a draft.
Yeah.
And so that war in a way affected everybody. Like there's, a lot of people got to dodge the draft, if, people with money, people with connections and stuff like that. But 90%, were on the line. It was like, so there was constantly that idea that, I could be next. And I think that, and I think a lot about war. It's just one of the things that is just foremost in my mind a lot of the time, and not just our wars, but everybody's. I think about Syria like every day, and think about those people, and just like, and how, you know, how what we complain about is so measly compared to, having missiles dropped on your head every day. It's like, really? But the fact that it's now an all volunteer military means that I think a lot of people go, I think a lot of people end up in the military because they don't have any options as far as, like how to pay for school or just how to make a living.
Right.
And that, and that is also tragic, but it's such a small percentage of us that are actually going and fighting these wars now, that, that's a huge difference. And I really, I'm not a sociologist, but I do think that I think it allows the rest of us to kind of sit back and not really think about it day to day. And I think that it's critically important for us to think about it. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I mean, I didn't have an agenda, but it's something that I thought about as I was writing it, is that, how convenient for all of us to not have to think about, war, because it's somebody else's business. And I think if we did think about it, we wouldn't be so ready to, to fight them, or to let somebody else fight them.
Yeah, and then we do have to worry about the people coming home again,
Which we don't do a very good job of either.
Yeah, I find that fascinating too. If you look at other cultures, particularly like with the Native American culture and how they would welcome back warriors into the tribe, um, it begs the question: what could we be doing better to bring our warriors back into our tribe?
Supporting them. Yeah. Yeah. It's just they kind of are forgotten, once they get home, and it's sad, and it's just really sad. And then it's just, I don't know, people, and now, now with now so many guys are surviving that wouldn't have survived, and coming home with these terrible injuries and brain injuries and stuff. And, that's a whole other ball of wax of, that now you've got a whole segment of society, or of just really damaged people who are trying really hard just to get by day to day, and not getting a lot of help. So yeah, we could do a lot of things better.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what the research process was like. I know you draw on a lot of your own, maybe your traveling experiences and that sort of thing. And you mentioned you have a huge stack of books that you went through. What was it like researching this novel?
Really didn't, I didn't do much research for it at all. There was, just some dates and things that I had to check, but having read so much about Vietnam, just the few references to, like the president and stuff. And it's funny that the president of Vietnam at the time, when the book was being copy edited, the copy editor, I'd get my my galleys and be looking at them, and she would want me to explain, like I mentioned, Jim and his wife, the dragon lady, and she said, shouldn't you explain who these people are? And I was like, no. No. I just I started writing, like no in the margins with my pencil, just big letters, because and a lot of other cultural, just cultural references of the time, because I tried really hard to contextualize it so that you could read it and not have to look anything up. Like you could figure out basically who these people were or what this reference was to, just because of the context.
Mhm.
And I thought, God, how clunky would it be to stop right here and say, okay, this was the president of Vietnam from such and such a year to such and such a year, and this was his wife, and this was his brother, and this is what they did. And I was like, A, we should know our history.
Mhm.
And B, if you're really curious, you look it up. Like I read a ton of Gunter Grass and Graham Greene. And I mean, there are so many references in those books to things that I don't know about. And I love that. I love that because it feels like it's stretching my brain. Like I have to really work hard to figure out what these guys are talking about. And I like that. And I don't mind making readers work a little bit, because I think I think we have, as readers, we have to bring something to it too, and I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to do that. People's attention spans are getting kind of limited.
It is a challenge. Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's all about the first 10 pages now and making sure you're hooking the reader. And
I
the
know.
thing I love about historical fiction, though, personally, is when I'm reading something and a name is thrown out there, it's like, ooh. The nice thing about Kindle and everything else now, it's so easy to look things up.
Oh, now, right, if you're reading on, yeah, I can't read books on electronics. I have to have a book in my hand. It's, my research books or, my writing research books and stuff are on Kindle, but I hardly ever look at them because I
Mhm.
just love having books in my hand. And every time I get rid of a box of books, I buy two more.
Yeah. Yes, it is my guilty pleasure as well. I've got books in every single room.
That's good. There are way worse things to have
I
lying
think so.
around.
I think so. So, what did you learn about yourself in this writing process when you were working on the given world
What did I learn about myself?
and the writing process?
The main thing I discovered was that I had always written short stories, and this book started out as short stories. The chapter, I think it's chapter 3, Girl 3 Speeds Pretty Good Breaks. That was the first thing I wrote, and I wrote it a long, long time ago, just as a standalone short story. But my short stories over the years there weren't a lot of them, but they were all very, very autobiographical. And in writing this book, I found, with every draft, I found the that I knew Riley really well, and at first she really was me. But the more she got to not be me, the more she got to be herself, the better the book got. And that was a really huge discovery. And part of what helped me make it was when I was at Madison doing my MFA, I took a class in writing nonfiction. And we were just doing, memoir kind of stuff. And having a memoir place, a nonfiction place to put my life really helped me just, invent things for the novel. And it was really a gift. It was just, I mean, it seems, self-evident. It seems like that should be pretty obvious, but until I started writing actual nonfiction, I went, oh. And then so over here I have to tell the truth, but over here I get to lie. Make things up. So yeah, and that, I think that was the biggest discovery I made. And then, like, having written it as short stories and then having to go back and align it as a novel, was a really interesting process and very difficult, because each story has its own arc, because I had always written short stories, so I got that, and it's much easier to do that with a, with a short piece than with a full novel. And I had never really even considered writing a novel, because I just thought, how do people do that? I mean, it's just nuts to even try, because it's just so much to handle. So doing it in small pieces at first what made it easier, and then in the long run made it harder, because then I had to go back and do that overarching arc for the whole thing. And then the next thing I had to do, because my agent almost sold this book when I was a month out of graduate school, and it was, and she showed it to an editor at Little Brown who loved it, but she couldn't sell it to her committee. But anyway, and then we got some more passes on it when we sent it out, and everybody said, the writing is beautiful, the characters are great, the story's wonderful, but it's too quiet, and it doesn't have that narrative pull. And I was, and so I asked Emma, my agent, I said, don't send it out anymore, just let me try to fix this. And I was like, how? I don't know how to do this. But I did. I just took it all apart, and then I just started, I call it dropping breadcrumbs. Like, so there's always sort of in each chapter, or each story that is told, there's a little bit left uncovered, so that it's like, it's what's going to happen to Riley, but it's also just one little bit at a time, like these little pieces of her life. And I think I wish that I could document how I did it, because apparently it worked.
Yes, it did.
Well, because when we sent it out, the second round of submissions, it was, editors just jumped on it. It was the most shocking thing that ever happened to me in my life. We sent it out on a Tuesday, and by Friday I talked to 11 editors.
Wow.
And we sold it the next Tuesday. I mean, it was just like, what is going on here?
That's exciting.
I don't know how, I still don't know how I did it. And I'm trying to do the same thing with the book I'm working on now. And it's really just, you just have to get granular. Like, you just have to just go in there and just see it from somebody else's perspective. It's just like, okay, how do I make my reader want to know what happens next? And it's funny, I read something recently, it might have been on Twitter, somebody said, it's like every book, it's like you're learning how to write all over again. And it's so true. It's like, you don't just learn how to write once.
Yeah. It's almost like, how do you find your process? Because there are authors that seem to turn out these books every 6 months, or every year.
But they're not necessarily good.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of them are series. So they are following a formula to a certain extent. And I think, particularly in the literary fiction world, it just doesn't really work that way.
No.
Nor
do you want it to, they're two completely different beasts. And, one of the hard lessons that I'm having to learn as a literary fiction writer is that most people don't care about the writing, and I am a sentence level girl. I mean, I will work on a sentence until it bleeds. And most people just don't care about that. They're reading for the story, and and I have to accept that and work with that, but that's not going to change the way I write, so whatever success looks like isn't going to be, in writing, like, I don't even know what all those the series are, because I haven't read them, but and it's it's kind of tough. You want people to read like writers read, and they don't, and that's fine. I'm just glad people are reading at all.
Yeah, well, I hope you don't change your style of writing, because the sentences you wrote, some of those sentences, it was just like, oh, I'm highlighting because they're just like to the heart. And I'd love for you to read some more from your novel if you could, because I think that really highlights some of your writing style. In this part of the novel, it's really about Riley's mother, Rose, and she has her grandson. She's still grappling, of course, with the loss of her own son, and she's on the reservation with her grandson. She's taking him to meet his grandfather. Um,
Let's see.
it was Slim chapter 4.
Right, I got that. I'm just trying to see where I should start. In any event, it's late spring now and wildflowers, mostly purple lupin, but some red paintbrush, some dirty white Queen Anne's lace flourish in yards and in the many vacant lots, making the otherwise dust-colored neighborhood a little brighter, almost radiant. She takes that as a good sign. From whom God does not have a place in all this. That would be the kind of wishful thinking she cannot afford. She carries a red and black wool blanket wrapped around some small, obviously alive thing. It's not a puppy or a newborn calf, it's a baby, her grandson. She's come to offer him to someone she's never met, not the boy's father. His father is in Vietnam, if he has not had the good sense to go AWOL and head for another country, one simultaneously very close and very far away. She can't speak for anyone else, but imagines they all thought about that passage when the lottery numbers were picked, matched to birthdays, fired like flaming fucking arrows into the hearts of mothers everywhere. But she's not thinking about that now. This is someone else's child, her daughter's, but still. And she doesn't even know if the father, this child's father, who is possibly already a dust cloud floating on the breeze over the South China Sea, even had a mother. Anything at this point seems possible. Maybe because there's this baby who, created a few months later, might now have been nothing, a memory, carried regret. When the decision came down from the court, they didn't talk about it. It was too late. And this boy's mother was mostly beyond talking by then anyway.
Oh my goodness. It's such a good section of the book.
Thanks.
I think it's those flaming arrows going into the mother's heart that
Yeah.
really struck me as a mother myself, thinking about that lottery of, sons going off to a conflict in a land you've only just learned about, and maybe in some respects.
Yeah. And what a system. Like, I remember sitting on the floor watching them pull those, the balls, the birth dates out of that thing. It was like, I can't remember exactly how it went, but I think it was like out of one, it was like the lottery things, the little like ping pong balls with dates. And I think one had month and one was the date. And they would just pick
Oh
two
my
balls.
gosh.
It was like, okay. And it was televised. It was on national TV. And you'd be sitting on the floor with your brother or your cousin or, friend or whatever. And then it would be like, okay, January 2nd. And then and that was, if that was somebody's birthday in the room, it was just like this shock, like, oh.
Reminds me of the Hunger Games.
Yeah, it kind of felt that way, it was just such a, I don't know what other system they could have come up with, but it
Mhm.
was just like, because the draft was so, I don't know, it was just such crazy times. It was just nutty, and every month it was like, oh, well, we need 50,000 more, we need 100,000 more, we need 300,000 more. And it was just like, all these gunslingers running around Washington going, send me some fresh boys.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Oh, I feel like I need to take a deep breath after that. Well, the last thing I want to ask you before we get to some speed questions I want to ask you, I would love, there's a lot of people who are writers who are going to be watching this. And we always love to ask the question of writing rituals. Do you have any writing rituals or processes that help
I
you reach your goals
I
or
don't
stay true to your
I don't
creativity?
know. I've tried the minimum number of words a day, and that was a disaster. I wrote like such a horrible book, and I was so proud of myself. I was like, I'm doing 500 words a day every day, and I did, and that got to the end. It was just so bad.
Mhm.
So that did not work for me. I think it works for some people. Um, I kind of do this. I just watched that Hemingway thing on PBS. It was really fascinating. And I don't model myself after Hemingway in any way whatsoever. But they did say that he would go back to the beginning of whatever he was working on every morning, like all the way back to the beginning, no matter how far back it was. And I have a tendency to do that to a certain point, because you just kind of get on a roll, and you just feel whatever the momentum is or isn't to a piece, and it slows you down, but I do that a lot. And by the time I've written like say 5 pages, I've already written the first 4 pages like 20 times. I'm sure there's some equation to this, but I just revise and revise and revise. But other than that, I try to read my own stuff like I haven't written it, which is of course difficult, but and I do, when I teach, I try to instill just a love of sentences or an attention to sentences, because that's what I love. It's just like not trying to just get from point A to point B.
Mhm.
Telling the story is one thing, but it's the way you tell it, to me, is critically important. And my favorite writers are sentence level writers. And other than that, I write every morning. I get up and I try not to get distracted by, Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And if the writing is going well, then that's easy. Then just going straight to it is really good. And I'm at that point with the new book right now, which took me a long time to get there. But um, writing new material for me is so painful. It's because but I will edit, I edit for fun. It's like when I was in high school, I would do quadratic equations for fun, which is nuts. And
Wow.
I never got past like basic algebra, but there was just something in my brain I loved. And there's something about writing that is kind of, I mean, just that X is to, whatever, just breaking down those quadratic equations. Sometimes I just kind of see sentences in that way. It's very bizarre, or paragraphs in that way. It's just like figuring out how all these things relate to each other and what I can move around to make it make sense. But anyway, other than that, just coffee and my laptop and my dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to the whole idea of enjoying the editing process because it is scary staring at the blank screen.
It's
Once you get things
agony.
kind of going, it's
Yeah.
so when you write, do you write and edit at the same time? You don't just write and then go back?
No, I wouldn't be able to just write a draft of something without editing as I go. I've tried, but it's disastrous. And I know, that people, I mean, everybody does it differently, and I know that is one way to do it. But I don't know. I feel like I'd be making more work for myself, which I did with the book I'm working on, because that horrible thing that I wrote, the first draft, was just so bad. And then going in and trying to fix something that's that god awful is really hard. Whereas if I keep myself honest as I go and at least try to make it as good as I can, and it's like try to make a first draft as good as I can. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have to go back and write it again 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 more times, which is what I'm doing now. But
Mhm.
each iteration gets better, but at least I'm not starting with just crap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like kind of, I don't know if you've ever participated, or I'm sure you've heard of NaNoWriMo, National.
No way. No way.
It's just,
The first time somebody told me about NaNoWriMo, I was like, what are you kidding? I feel sorry for agents who they must get swarmed with just horrible stuff every December. Their inboxes just must be full of the worst, like hastily written crap.
Mhm.
And I don't know. And I know oh, and of course I can't remember his name, the guy who first came up with NaNoWriMo, and he's a great guy, and it's, and it makes sense in some respects, to just sort of, get something written,
Mhm.
I suppose. But I've definitely find that most people, and I know a lot of people who want to be writers. I mean, the writers that I know get it. They understand that revision is 90% of what you're doing. It's not just, telling the story once. But most people I know who want to be writers don't want to revise. And it's kind of, it shows.
Mhm. Well, and when you were talking about the importance of sentences and creating, pulling words together into something that feels really beautiful and resonates with you as the writer, I think readers may not notice it so much, but they're drawn in to the story because
I,
of
yeah.
those sentences, I think.
Yeah, I hope so,
Yeah.
and it's the sentences, and it's also just creating a world,
Right.
and that I think that that world building, if it's done properly, definitely influences readers, even if they don't notice, what, yeah, I have to believe that,
Yeah.
so to keep going. But
Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about your newest project that you're working on?
sure. It's funny. I started it as when we were on submission with The Given World, and I mean, it's like a completely different book now. But when all these editors were saying, this book is too quiet, I was sort of like, well, I can write loud. And so the story is, it centers around two women who meet in Montana, and they both have a history of family members or loved ones, who they've lost to meth, basically to crystal methadone. So they start burning down meth labs.
Oh, oh
And,
gosh.
yeah, and then things, of course, go haywire. And so that's the basic story. And so, when when the book opens, one of the girls has been really badly injured during one of their fires, and the other one is telling her stories, basically trying to keep her in the world, trying to keep her planted or keep her alive. And so it's structurally, it's been a bitch. Like the structure is not my forte, and having these two, it's a frame novel. So
Mhm.
there's the stories that Micah is telling Val, just trying to keep her occupied and keep her from, just dwelling on where she is and not being able to do the things. Because Micah is the fire starter, and at one point Val was a firefighter. And now
That's
Val,
interesting.
yeah, and now, so it's in some ways it's an environmental story, because fire, obviously, we all know now that fire has just like become this huge thing. And in Northern California, well, in Southern California and Arizona, we've already had 4 fires here, around us
Wow.
already, spring. So that's just one of the themes of it, is this, fire, and how that's just become a part of our lives. And so having, one girl be a fire starter and the other being a firefighter was just kind of, interesting in how they decide that this is something that they're going to do, even though they both know that it's insane and it probably isn't going to make any difference. But it's kind of like people, I mean, when I first started thinking about, okay, what is this really about? I think a lot of it is just about how when we're faced with something that we can't control, but that really bothers us or upsets us, you have to do something.
Mhm.
And sometimes something stupid is the only thing available. So this is, this is what they do.
And when is
Yeah.
this read? When will this be published? It's
I have
called
no- I have no-
20% of
The 20% chance of mercy.
okay.
Yeah.
And when do you have it ready to?
I don't even know.
Not sure.
My agent retired. I'm not with Simon and Schuster any longer. It's
Okay.
This is all fresh. I have an agent who I really want to work with, who's waiting to see
Mhm.
the next draft of this book. So fingers crossed that she will
For
love
sure.
it. Yes, and we'll be able to go from there. It's funny, I've gotten to a point where, I got, The Given World was my, my big money book. It was nice. I got a pretty fat advance for that book.
Nice.
But at this point, I, it's so, I'd feel like it would be nice to have another chunk of change.
Yeah.
But I've gotten to the point where I just want people, I want to write really well. I want to write good books and I want people to read them. And I want an editor who understands what I'm trying to do and will make me make it better. That's, I've learned a lot in that first experience about, how the publishing world works. And it can be pretty messed up, it can be pretty disappointing, but now I know what's important. So that's, so yeah, fingers crossed for an agent who loves my work and will kick my ass to make me make it better, and an editor that will do the same thing. So
Well, definitely fingers crossed, and because I want to read it. Sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. Well, Marian, I want to ask you a few short, quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what is the best advice you ever got about writing?
Lori Moore, who I studied with at Madison and who I love, said when she read the first story that I turned into workshop, which turned out to be the chapter in here about Lou, the junkie cab driver.
Mm-hmm.
I said that one. No, actually, I think it was the prologue. But anyway, she read it. And when I first wrote it, I used to have a tendency to give my characters a soft landing. No matter what kind of shit was going down, I would always ease them out of it, like, cut them some slack. And she said, I still have it. She wrote on it. She said, okay, you drove the stake in, but then you took it out. She said, what would happen if you left it in? And basically what she was saying was, write the hard stuff, like write things that hurt. She said, you've got the story, but you have to, it has to hurt, because otherwise why bother? And that was absolutely the best advice I could have gotten, not just for The Given World, but for everything I'm writing. Yeah. And the other thing I love that she said is that, writing a novel is basically just solving problems you've created yourself until you can't solve any more of them, and then you're done.
Oh, that's going to stick with me.
And one more thing she said was, if you're messing with a sentence and you just can't fix it, get rid of it. Just cut it out. You probably don't need it. Like,
Yeah.
and so I do that a lot. It's like, okay, stop. So anyway, yeah, she's one of my favorite writers, and I got studying with her was just such a gift.
Wow, it sounds like it. You got some great advice.
Yeah.
So tell me what one of your favorite, excuse me, what one of your favorite books is, or a series, or whatever, by one of your favorite female authors.
Well, I love Lori. I mean, I will read everything that she's ever
What has she
written.
written?
Oh my God. Start with Birds of America. That's the short story collection that really put her on the map. And I learned about it from David Sedaris, of all people. He was on tour. Yeah, he was on tour, and I went to see him in Missoula, and he was just gushing about this book. It was like a couple years after it came out, and it's wonderful. But yeah, all her short story books, and she's written some novels too. And then she writes a lot for the New York Review of Books. She writes a lot of criticism. She's just brilliant. She's just amazing, and she's a sweetheart. So Lori Moore, and Lori is Lorrie. Lori Moore. Mavis Gallant is wonderful, and I wish I could name one of her books. I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. I've read some stuff recently in which I wish I'd brought the books and had them sitting next to me, because there's some really good, brilliant stuff coming out, but of course.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what comes out of this whole pandemic time period, when people were kind of forced to sit and work on their projects.
Yeah, I do. I think agents and editors are probably pretty overwhelmed right now with, just a lot of writing. It'll be interesting to see how it affects what people are writing about, because I don't imagine that the publishing world is going to want a whole bunch of pandemic novels.
No. I think they've said that.
Yes.
So tell me what you always keep near you when you write.
Coffee, but it's decaf. And I used to, but all my books are in boxes because I just moved recently. I used to keep a copy of Panama on my desk. It's Tom McGuane. And it was the first book I ever read that made me realize that, oh, you can write like this. Like, it's possible to write like just a crazy person.
And people will read it.
And it's okay. And, and I mean, I've always just been a reader. Like, I was the kid I would be reading the cereal box. Like, I always had my face in something to read, and nobody in my family could talk to me when I was reading. I just was checked out. Mm-hmm. But that book, somebody gave me that book, and it was 1980. And I remember reading it and just being blown away, and just his sentences and just his disregard for any regular kind of writing. And it's I look at it now, and it's, I don't know, there was just something about that book. And so now I don't even know where it is, and I still have my old dog-eared underlined marked up copy of it, but that was something I kept on my desk for years. Yeah, I just read a paragraph and go, okay, there's that feeling.
Yeah, that's actually a great tip, to open up a book that you really loved and you love the writing style, to get you kind of your creative juices going,
especially if
your
you're trying to write. Especially if you're trying to write. I mean, a thing can be revised too much, so that it's too smooth, and it's not, having that edge is a really good, I mean, to me, it's a really good thing. It's just to kind of cut loose. And it's hard to, once you've smoothed something out so much, it's hard to get that edge back. So sometimes just there's a recent New Yorker story that a friend of mine wrote that was in the New Yorker about a month ago. It's called Featherweight. and the author's name is Sterling Holy White Mountain, and he's a Blackfeet Indian from Montana. And that story made me remember how I want to write, because it's just so good and it's so edgy and it's so unusual. You know, it's not, a lot of New Yorker stories kind of run together for me. They all sort of sound the same and they're all very cerebral and stuff. And this was just a complete departure. And I'm hoping that he'll have a book coming out soon, because it really, I was live tweeting him while I was reading it.
That's awesome.
Or live texting him saying, oh my God, this sentence, oh my God, this sentence, oh my God, this image. So yeah.
Oh, I'm going to check that out.
Oh, it was really good. I think it was April 6th, I think. Anyway, featherweight. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, where can people follow you? They want to follow your journey.
I'm on Twitter. I'm terrible at Twitter, and I'm just at Marian Palaia, all one word, at Twitter. And I have an author page on Facebook that I never add to. So pretty much that's it. I need to get my Goodreads jam going, you know, and start.
Are you on Goodreads?
Yeah. Yes, and if people wanted to follow me on Goodreads, that would be great. I just saw an author who did, I can't remember who it was, but she did this really cool thing. Like, she just pulled sentences and passages out of her book and then talked about them on Goodreads. And when I figure out how to do that, I'll do that. And I love the stuff that you picked for me to read, because that was stuff I'd forgotten, I've written. And I'd love to just, you know, put some passages on Goodreads and then talk about what I was thinking when I wrote them, or what, you know, whatever. So if people wanted to follow me on Goodreads, that would be awesome. So I guess you just look up The Given World on Goodreads and don't read the 1-star reviews.
There are a lot of trolls on Goodreads.
Oh my God. I think people who review books on Goodreads should have to write one first.
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of armchair quarterbacks.
Oh my God.
Well, thank you, Marian. This was so much fun. I loved learning from you today.
Thank you so much. And good luck with your book. I just realized that you're writing one. That's awesome. So
yeah, it's push and pull, I tell you.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, I'd love to read it someday. So
all right. Well, thank you, Marian. And I will be in touch.
Great. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.